Well, Saturday night, and the wife's out, so figured, well, I head down to the basement, put together the axle assemblies. Today I was outside working on the quad for a little while because it was nice and warm, and started to put the front differential in, and it started to get dark, so also ran out of room on the video recorder here, so just to summarize what I ended up finishing up out there, I just drove the two really long bolts through to mount the differential, and then I pretty much ran out of time. And then last thing I did was I added some oil to the front differential because that hadn't had any oil in it since I had finished rebuilding it, and I didn't want it to be sitting out there in the elements completely dry, so I did put a little bit of oil in it. I'm not even sure what the proper oil level was in the front there, so I just removed the side fill port and injected enough oil in there so that the level was even with the bottom of that opening, which may or may not be correct. I'll verify that at some other point, but important thing is I've got a little bit of oil in there. So alright, so I'm going to get to work. I got my coffee here, got some music, clear up a little bit more bench space, and get to work putting together these axle assemblies, CV joints. Before I start assembly of this unit, which I already completely disassembled, cleaned, and started to reassemble, I'm going to take this one and soak it. This is the first time I've taken the boot off on this one, and can actually see the grease in there is really badly contaminated, and doesn't look good at all. I don't know if it's showing up well on the video here, but you can actually see where the grease is reacted with more than likely water that got in there. But not surprised. This didn't even have a good boot clamp on it. The boot clamp, original one, was either missing or they didn't bother putting it on, and they used a plastic wire tie to actually hold the boot on. So anyways, I'm going to soak this so that it can soak for a while I'm working on the other one. Okay, in the process of wanting to make sure that I was going to be assembling this CV joint correctly, the outer CV joint correctly, and also since I was going to have to get to it sooner or later, I decided to clean up the other CV joint that hadn't been disassembled yet off the shaft, and I found a couple of things. First off, this CV joint is slightly different. One of the things I had noticed in the beginning was that the size of the shaft that the nut goes onto is different. This one is larger. This one here also has part number clearly stamped on it. It's marked DNTND 68LAC 100RQ3C, and this one has no part numbers visible on it. The other thing, and the biggest problem, is that in the process of cleaning this up and examining it, I found it's actually cracked. The cage is cracked right here where my finger's pointing. There's actually a little chip of metal missing, and the crack goes straight through over to one of the windows that one of the balls is in. So this is junk. Good news is, instead of having to buy a new outer CV joint and putting it on this shaft, I actually found a brand new half shaft on eBay cheap. It comes with the outer CV joint, already assembled onto the shaft with the boot, grease in it, ready to go, clamps, everything, and then it comes with a brand new boot on the to go to the inner CV joint, and you just reuse your inner CV joint. So I'll have a couple extra boots left over, but that's no big deal. Nothing I could do about that because I didn't realize this was cracked. And the other thing is that when you're looking for, when you're inspecting these cages and you want to make sure there aren't any cracks in it, sometimes it's hard to see a crack. But what you can do is you can drop it on a hard surface, and it should ring like that. If you get a dull sound to it, you can almost guarantee you've got a crack somewhere that you've missed. So, that being said, I'm going to put this off to the side, and I'm going to focus on reassembling this CV joint, which I'm not so crazy about the condition of this part of the inner CV joint here, this area here, that the seal, the inner seal on the knuckle rides on it's pretty pitted, but I'm not going to spend the money to replace this entire CV joint just because of that. This unit, this whole Arctic Cat that I bought cheaply, was supposed to be a fairly inexpensive project, and I don't want to get too out of control. My thinking is what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to use the new half shaft with the new hub, so that'll have one side will be basically a new hub area riding on the outer seal, new half shaft CV joint with a new inner outer CV joint that'll be riding on the inner seal. So one side will be really good, and then the other side will be the weaker link. That'll have the this inner CV outer CV joint riding on the seal area, and it'll also have, I've decided I'm going to try and save that other hub because it's not as bad as I originally thought. And until I get another really great deal on a half shaft or a hub, that's what I decided I'm going to do. So for now, I can put together this side of the shaft, the CV joints. So basically, the way that this goes in is you've got this cage right here, and the way that it works, the inner CV joint cage, the bevel edge faces the differential. So again, looking at this, there's a slight bevel on this cage right here, and this side doesn't have that. So this side faces out. So this goes in like this. And then this has to go inside here, and this could be rotated around either way, but the way that this goes in is so that the groove that's in there, that the snap ring engages when you insert the shaft, is actually going to be inside the CV joint further. So now I'm going to start to reassemble this. Okay, I found the easiest way to do this is to start out by having this inner race out. Just insert the cage in, and then you take a mallet, and then I use the dead blow mallet, and hit this squarely, and you'll be able to pop this cage in to the point where it'll swivel. And then reinsert the inner race. Now I'm going to start installing the balls, which is basically going to be a reverse procedure of disassembly, which is you line it all up, you line a window up, and tilt this down really far, and you're going to tap it down, pop a ball in, tap the ball in, and then just keep going. Getting these balls in can be kind of tricky. It's better to mount this in the vise. I've wrapped a rag around the shaft to protect the shaft, the spline shaft, and got it secure in there, and then basically using a brass drift, I tap on the outer cage, tap one side down to pop the other side up, exposing the window to pop the ball into, then pop it back down and do the opposite side, and just continue in that fashion until you get all of them in there. And then just give it some good taps around the whole cage to pop the cage all the way back in to position. And then you can insert the shaft without the clip on it temporarily, just to give you something to stick in here and work it around and make sure that you've got it properly seated and you don't feel that it's bound up. And what I mean by that is just take the shaft. The clip is not in there, so I can engage the shaft and it's not going to get stuck. It'll come right out. But basically with the shaft in there, now I can just wiggle it around and work it and feel. And what I'm feeling for is I'm making sure that it isn't clicking or binding in any position. It does feel a little stiff but that's to be expected considering that there's absolutely no grease in here right now. So that feels pretty good. I'm satisfied with that. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install one of the new boots onto the shaft and install the clip in the groove, and then start to reassemble this outer CV joint. Okay, the inner and outboard boots are actually different. They have different part numbers. Holding them side by side, I couldn't figure out what was different about them, but we're going to just do as we're told and use the part number that's supposed to be the inner where it's supposed to be and the outer where it's supposed to be. So I'm actually first going to install the inner CV boot, and the reason why is because I've already installed the race and the balls for the inner CV joint and put the clip on, so I'm not going to be able to slide this on this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert this boot, slide it all the way down into position, and then put the inner boot on. Okay, so there's the inner CV boot installed. You slide that all the way down, and this area where the band is going to be, you want that directly over this groove that's actually in the shaft. That way when the clamp is tightened, it will actually ride down, push the boot into that little groove right there, and that's what helps keep it in position. So that one's on. So now I'm going to put the outer boot on. Okay, now I've got the outer CV boot in position, and now that it's installed, you can see there's hard to see really any difference between the two sides. This side might be slightly longer, but I'm not sure. Well, anyways, so it's on. So now what I need to do is I need to install the small clip that rides in this groove that actually, when this shaft is pushed down into this splined hole, will pop into that groove down the bottom there, and actually that's what retains this and keeps it together. And so I'm going to put the clip on, and then I'm going to don some gloves because it's time to start packing some grease. Okay, these replacement boots that I bought online, made by a company called Factory Spec or Raider. Seems like they're not really big into CV boots, even though they manufacture them. Went to their website and they seem to be all about helmets. But anyways, they do make these boots, and there are actually instructions on them. The interesting thing is that they talk about having a clip that actually is supposed to engage that in a groove. They make it sound like that's included in the kit, but it's not. So make sure you save your old clips, and hopefully you don't damage them in the process of taking them out. The other thing that's interesting is each boot comes with 2 packets of grease, and what's weird about that is in the instructions right on the box it actually states to clean off the grease and slide replacement outboard boot into position and repack the outboard joint using 1/3 of the grease in the packet provided. So they make it sound like there was only supposed to be 1 packet of grease in here, and they actually make it sound like you're only supposed to use 1/3 of the grease in this packet to repack one joint, and then use another 1/3 of the grease in the packet to repack the other joint, because they're assuming that you had to remove the inboard joint and disassemble it in order to get the boots off and slide the new ones on. So they're assuming that you're not replacing that boot, and so you don't have the grease. But still, that would account for 2/3 of the grease in one packet. It doesn't account for the purpose of the second packet of grease. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to liberally pack the joint with grease and see how much it uses roughly, and I'll know that I have plenty of grease to spare because I've got a whole other packet here. So, all right, so I'm going to don some gloves and pack some grease in here. All right, so I cut a small corner off of the bag, and use it kind of like a pastry bag and squeeze the grease into each little opening around each ball, inner and outer, and then squeezed a liberal amount down into the shaft, so that'll get forced back behind there when I push the shaft in, and then that should be a good liberal coating. So now I'm going to install the shaft with the clip on it, and it should snap in. Okay, one thing I found right off the bat is that you don't want to have this boot fully in position, because it kind of gets in the way of you trying to get this this shaft inserted in there and snapped in. So you just slide it back out of your way while you're trying to work this in. And also that clip should just want to snap right in there, but it can be a little tricky, so I'm going to use a small screwdriver to kind of push around it as I'm pushing down. Okay, just use a very small blade screwdriver to keep that clip from getting hung up as you're first getting it started. And then once that's started, you can just give it a slight tap on the top here with a hammer, and it seats right in. And then you can just give it a quick tug, and you can feel that it's fully engaged. So now I can finish installing the boot. I'll clean off this grease that got on there. Okay, the inner CV joint and boot is now assembled. The last step that I have to do here now is to install the bands that come with the kit to hold the boot in place. And the bands are flat metal bands, and they're going to do a lot better job than the plastic wire tie that was on this when I started this whole disassembly. There are several different types of retaining bands used on these boots. The ones that come with this kit are this simple type here. The crimp style actually are pretty easy to use. But with the crimp style, you actually have to have a somewhat close sizing. So you can't use like this one generic band to do the small diameter here and then also the large diameter. But the plus about the crimp style is that once you stick it around, basically there's a set of special pliers that are used to just pinch them, and they're done. This style here, there is a special tool you can buy to actually tighten these on, but I talked to a couple of places trying to find that tool, and none of the auto parts stores around me had that tool. And I talked to a couple of the guys that do these, and they said that all they do is they use vice grips to clamp onto the end here to get a good grip and pull tight, and just kind of pull this. Basically this just slides through this slot right here, and then you pull this tight, and once it's pulled tight, you then bend it over itself back, and then bang down these two little tabs. They're kind of hard to see, but there's two little tabs that you just fold them over, and that's what retains that. So I'm going to try and do one of these and see how it works. Well, this is my first attempt, and I don't like the way it came out, so I'm going to try again. I've actually got quite a few of these. I've got another whole package of these that the company sent me, because initially when it didn't have these small little circlips in there, I called them and asked them if they could send me the clips, because I believed that they were missing from the package. And what they ended up sending me was a whole bag of these bands. So much for the clips. Anyways, I'm going to undo this one and redo it. Okay, the second try came out a lot better. So I am now going to put on the small one. There are two sizes of the bands that came with this kit, even though they are sort of generic. There was a short one and a long one. Of course, you want to use the long one on the larger diameter and the short one on the small diameter. Okay, the outer CV boot is fully installed along with the bands. Found that the bands that they sent me later were a different style, and they were a lot easier to work with. That's why that inner one came out a lot neater than the outer one. But it's tight, and it'll work. So now I'm going to pack grease in the cage and ball bearings for the inner CV joint, and install the inner CV joint guts into the inner CV joint housing. Okay, now I've packed the grease in there and installed it in, and then after you install it, you slide it down, then you pop in that large that large retaining ring wire type clip that just snaps in a groove, and that is what holds this from slipping all the way out during assembly. And then now I'm going to slide the boot over into place and install two bands. Alright, so here's my axle all set to go. Got my boots on, bands all on there. This inner CV joint is in really good shape. This area here that's going to make contact with the seal on the differential is in really good shape, so I don't suspect I'm going to have any problems there. The outer CV joint, again, that seal area is not so great, but we're going to live with it the way it is. And if down the line, if this CV joint fails, then I'll just end up having to replace the inner seal on the knuckle when I do this joint, which isn't that big of a deal. Alright, back to resolving the issue of this bad half shaft. Again, this half shaft has got a cracked cage inside the outer CV joint, and I could have just gotten a new outer CV joint for this half shaft, but I found one on eBay that was a Moose Racing half shaft, and I got it really cheap, $40. So that was a real steal. Problem was, I didn't notice that it's for a 98, and of course my Arctic Cat's a 97, and it turns out there is a difference. And the first difference, which I'm not sure whether or not it's because of the year change or whether or not it's because it's aftermarket versus stock, is that this Moose Racing shaft is heavier and thicker than this one. But oddly enough, the other shaft that was on the machine when I got it was as thick as this one, which makes me think the other shaft was already changed over to either a 98 shaft or an aftermarket shaft. So thought, well, other than being thick, maybe I won't have a problem, because all of these dimensions on this part of the CV joint are identical. Problem is right here, this slides down onto the spline shaft, and then this groove right here is where this outside retaining clip right here snaps onto, and that's what holds this onto that. On the Moose Racing shaft, that groove is actually in a slightly different position. It's actually only about a millimeter or two over from where it should be. So initially when I slid this on to the shaft here, it wouldn't go on far enough to expose that groove. It would only go on to about there. So what I did was I used my Dremel roto style tool with a small grinder head on it, and I ground out just enough of the metal on the inside here all the way around. Doesn't look very pretty, but it now allows this to slide on far enough. I started by trying to grind the metal off of the shaft here, but the shaft proved to be much harder than the actual this inner CV joint part, so I decided to do this instead. And now this goes on just far enough to expose that, so that I can now put this retaining clip on and reassemble this. That's going to allow me to use this new Moose Racing heavy duty half shaft with my original inner CV joint. So that worked out perfectly fine. And this, again, this doesn't look nice, but it's not going to have any effect on performance. I've taken off such a small amount of metal, it's not going to significantly weaken it. And I also was very careful not to nick these races where the balls actually ride and damage any of that. So now I'm going to install this clip. Okay, I've installed the clip now, and it's a good fit, and it's going to retain that really well. But now I need to remove it because I forgot that I've got to put this cage, actually, I've got to put this inner part back into the cage with the balls before I install it on the shaft, because it doesn't fit on that way. So, but anyways, at least I know now it's going to work.